We all know Jim Harbaugh and Joe Hortiz. And if you've been paying attention, then you know that they want to run the ball at a high level.
Well, I think Jim mentioned it last week. We want to be strong, physical, tough. We want to develop a really good run game. You build a great run game and a great offensive line, you protect your quarterback.
And their plan to do that is to place a huge emphasis on the offensive line.
I don't think you can ever have enough offensive linemen. And I think this year proved itself. Always keep that unit strong, and you're going to have a chance to have a good running game and a good passing game and everything.
Right.
With a shaky offensive line, you're not going to do much of anything.
Now, there is one move that I have been talking about ever since that Jim Harbaugh press conference, and it seems more and more likely as these days go by. And if it happened, it would make Chargers fans absolutely riot. So make sure to like and subscribe if you do enjoy this content, bro. It helps me out so much. And now let's talk about the Chargers' first round draft pick. Now, you probably already know where I'm going with this, but there is a very real possibility of the Chargers drafting an offensive lineman in the first round. And just based off of my comment section, bro, a lot of you guys would go crazy and hate that move, because that means that the Chargers would be passing on some pretty good blue chip wide receivers. I mean, Malik Nabers is a fan favorite. I love him too. It's easy to see why people love him. He's a freak athlete. He is so explosive. He also has the most yards per route run, and he kind of reminds me of like a bigger Antonio Brown, because he's just so dynamic with the ball in his hands. I mean, just imagine that dude with Justin Herbert, man. But then also another blue chip wide receiver, Rome Odunze, is right there as well. And a lot of people like him more than Malik Nabers because of his route running ability and his great hands. He's also a bigger wide receiver, and the comps that he has gotten is to Larry Fitzgerald. And honestly, I can see that. There are not one but two huge difference makers to take at wide receiver for the Chargers. But if you're totally bought in to Quentin Johnston and Josh Palmer for the next few years, then okay. But what about the tight end that I just made an entire video about, how he is the best tight end in college football history, and he fits the Chargers offense perfectly? Greg Roman and Jim Harbaugh utilized 12 personnel, which is having two tight ends on the field a lot. And Jim Harbaugh actually ran 12 personnel more than anybody in college football last year. And they're going to be throwing to tight ends a ton, asking them to block a ton. And Brock Bowers was not only the best receiving tight end in college football, is sitting right there for the taking, and the Chargers pass on him. I know it would just infuriate so many people. I mean, these are three big blue chip guys, in my opinion. I would be upset if they passed on him, but I would also understand the decision making behind it. Now, the Chargers rushing offense last year, I said this yesterday, they were the worst in the league, not only in run blocking, but in their rushing offense in total, as graded by PFF. If the Chargers are totally committed to running the ball, remember they were the worst team in the league last year, then that means that they're going to dedicate some serious resources into fixing that. And their best resource right now, it's that fifth pick. But it doesn't have to be. I mean, I would be happy if the Chargers took an offensive lineman in the first round if they traded down. And that is a very real possibility. I think it's actually even more likely for them to trade down and draft an offensive lineman than to just like straight up take one at 5, like take Joe Alt at 5. And the reason I think it's so likely is because of all of the buzz with 4 quarterbacks that could be possibly taken in the top 10. And the Chargers are placed perfectly right now in front of the Giants, who have Danny Dimes, and they are a threat to draft a quarterback like JJ McCarthy, who teams like the Falcons, the Vikings, the Broncos, they're probably not going to trade with us. The Raiders, they're probably not going to trade with us either. And the Saints, those teams might want to trade up ahead of the Giants to take JJ McCarthy or Jayden Daniels if he is there. And remember, Daniel Jeremiah reported that there's going to be 4 or 5 different teams that want to trade up for a quarterback this year. Part of the reason for that is because they don't think next year's quarterback class is going to be very good. And one of those teams out of that 4 to 5 is probably going to pull the trigger. So with that, and the history that Joe Hortiz has in trading down when he was a part of the Ravens, and also how he talked about valuing every single draft pick that he can get his freaking hands on, I think the Chargers are not just listening to these teams trying to trade up to number 5, but they're probably actively calling them back as well, trying to trade down and using their leverage of all of these teams trying to trade up to bring up the value of that 5th pick. But let's just say they don't trade down. If they don't, I still think that it is a very real possibility that they draft Joe Alt, who, in my opinion, is the best offensive lineman in the class this year. Lots of people would flame them for this pick because they already have a franchise left tackle, Rashawn Slater, and they would have to move Joe Alt to the right side. So why would you pick a player at 5 just to swap positions? Daniel Jeremiah even mocked Joe Alt to the Chargers this morning as I was making this video and said, this feels like a statement pick, and Joe Hortiz played a part in drafting Jonathan Ogden, who started at guard before playing tackle, and he had a Hall of Fame career. Listen, there is no doubt in my mind that Daniel Jeremiah is tapped into the Chargers building, plus he has a long history with Joe Hortiz. Plus, I have been saying that I think the writing has been on the wall about drafting an offensive lineman very highly ever since I was listening to Jim Harbaugh's press conference, which was like almost a month ago now. But Daniel Jeremiah, he didn't do any trades in that mock draft. I think that's maybe why he had the Chargers picking Joe Alt. When asked about what the Chargers might do in the first round on Twitter, he posted this GIF. And if you're only listening to this video, then it is a Simpsons GIF of someone nailing down a for sale sign in his front yard. Dude, the Chargers pick is for sale, and Joe Hortiz is going to wait all the way until his pick is up on draft day to finalize the trade, and I'm calling it right now. I also think that this GIF could maybe have like a double meaning, and I don't know, tell me if I'm crazy, but he's nailing the for sale sign in the front yard of the house, plus the house, you're going to move into a different house, you got to build the foundation of your new house. How do you build the foundation of your football team? With the trenches, the offensive line, the defensive line. I don't know, maybe I'm crazy. It's just a thought. Now that I'm saying it out loud, I feel crazy. That's probably not what it is. It's probably just saying he wants to trade down. So then in a trade down scenario, if you do draft an offensive lineman, I already talked about this, but depending on how far down they go, that is going to determine who they draft. There have been reports that Joe Hortiz is very high on Amarius Mims. I already talked about the similarity in prospects between Amarius Mims, Mekhi Becton, who Chad Alexander drafted, the assistant general manager of the Chargers, and Orlando Brown, who Joe Hortiz drafted with the Ravens. Amarius Mims, he may have the highest potential out of all of the offensive linemen in the draft this year, and he already plays right tackle. He's a mauler in the run game, even though sometimes he can stop his feet, but that's something that you can coach him up on. I mean, he is a really raw prospect, but he flashes quickness, strength. He has great hands at times, but he needs to be consistent with that. And again, he needs to be coached up, and he hasn't had a ton of playing experience in college. Joe Hortiz, he is going to draft players that Jim Harbaugh can coach. And Amarius Mims, in a trade down scenario, say you go down to like even 11, he is a guy that fits that Jim Harbaugh system and would fill a need on the Chargers roster. Amarius Mims, he would come in and be better than Trey Pipkins right away, in my opinion. And also he would improve our run game, which is going to be the backbone of this entire team. And if you are worried about Amarius Mims developing because Trey Pipkins and Chris Watt, Forrest Lamp, all of these guys, they didn't develop, well, we have Jim Harbaugh now. And he is one of the best in the business at developing guys. I mean, just look at that Michigan roster this year. They have the most players ever going to the scouting combine, and they might break the record for most players drafted by a single school that was set by Georgia, I think like 4 or 5 years ago, or maybe 3 years ago. If the Chargers trade down and select Amarius Mims, like say at 11, maybe even 8th overall, don't freak out and just trust in Jim Harbaugh's vision. Because if Amarius Mims is coached up, we could have one of the best offensive lines in the league. I mean, we could have a mauler offensive line with 2 great bookend tackles on each side. Bro, that might be Jim Harbaugh's vision. But of course, in order to run the ball, you need to have a good running back. And if you want to see my video from yesterday, I talked about the running back situation that the Chargers are in.